Chapter 1. The Night My Mind Wouldn't Be Quiet. The room was quiet in the way only late nights can be. Not peaceful, just still. The lights were off except for a small lamp in the corner. The city outside had slowed down, reduced to distant traffic and the occasional sound of someone passing by on the street below. Everything around me had decided it was time to rest. My body agreed. My mind didn't. I lay on my back, staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of the day settle into my muscles. My eyes were tired. My shoulders ached. Even my breathing felt heavy, like it wanted to sink into sleep. But my thoughts stayed alert. They moved in slow circles at first, touching familiar places, small things, unfinished conversations. A moment from earlier that day I replayed without meaning to, a sentence I wondered if I should have said differently. Nothing urgent, nothing dramatic, just enough to keep me awake. I turned onto my side and closed my eyes. The mattress felt comfortable. The room felt safe. There was no reason to be restless. Still, my mind continued. It picked up one thought and then another, stacking them carefully as if they mattered more at night. I told myself not to think. I told myself I would deal with everything tomorrow. Tomorrow didn't listen. The thoughts didn't feel loud or aggressive. They weren't attacking me. They were persistent, like someone tapping lightly on a door over and over again, never hard enough to be ignored. I checked the clock. The numbers glowed softly in the dark. Too late to worry about this, I thought. Too early to solve it. That space between night and morning felt dangerous. There were no distractions left, no messages coming in, no tasks waiting, no noise to interrupt the mind once it started moving. I noticed how my body reacted. My jaw tightened slightly. My chest felt shallow. I shifted under the blanket, searching for a position that would quiet something inside me. It didn't work. The thoughts changed shape. They moved from the present to the past, then jumped forward again. What if I had made the wrong choice? What if I had missed something important? What if this feeling never stopped? I recognized the pattern, even as it happened. Overthinking didn't arrive as a single thought. It arrived as a chain. One idea led to another, each one small on its own, but heavy together. I wasn't solving anything. I was just circling. I told myself I was just being careful, responsible, thoughtful. But lying there in the dark, it felt less like thinking and more like being trapped inside my own head. I rolled onto my other side and stared at the faint outline of the door. The room didn't change. The silence stayed the same. Only my mind kept moving. I realized something uncomfortable. Nothing bad had happened that day. There was no argument, no mistake, no crisis waiting for attention. If someone asked me what was wrong, I wouldn't know what to say. Nothing was wrong, and yet my mind refused to rest. That realization made the unease sharper. If there was no clear problem, why couldn't I let go? Why did my thoughts feel so urgent when there was nothing urgent to solve? I focused on my breathing, counting slowly the way people suggest. Inhale, exhale. Again. It helped for a moment. Then another thought slipped in. Did I forget something important? Did I disappoint someone? Why does this always happen at night? The questions didn't need answers. They just needed space to exist. I noticed how easily my mind turned silence into a place of interrogation. During the day, there were distractions, tasks, conversations, movement. At night, all of that disappeared. What remained was me and my thoughts. I had spent so much time filling my days that I hadn't noticed how crowded my mind had become. Every unresolved feeling, every unspoken worry, every quiet doubt waited patiently for the moment I stopped moving. Night gave them permission. I thought about how often I told myself I was fine, how easily I moved through life without stopping to check in, how quickly I pushed feelings aside because there was always something else to do. Now there was nothing else. The room was calm, the world outside had gone quiet, and my mind, finally uninterrupted, was asking to be heard. That was the part that unsettled me. I wasn't afraid of the thoughts themselves. Most of them were ordinary, predictable, repetitive. I was afraid of how many there were, afraid of how long they had been waiting. I sat up slightly and leaned against the headboard, pulling the blanket around me. The fabric felt grounding, real. I pressed my feet against the mattress and noticed the physical sensations, trying to anchor myself in the room instead of my head. For a few seconds, it worked. Then my mind returned to its rhythm. What if this never stops? What if this is just how my nights are now? What if I'm doing something wrong? The questions didn't ask for answers, they asked for attention. I realized then that overthinking wasn't an enemy I could fight. It wasn't something I could argue with or shut down. The harder I tried to control it, the louder it seemed to become. It wasn't caused by the night, it was revealed by it. The room didn't create the unease, the quiet didn't bring the thoughts. They had been there all along, moving softly beneath the noise of the day. I had just never slowed down enough to notice them. That understanding didn't calm me immediately, but it changed something subtle. The overthinking stopped feeling like a personal failure and started feeling like a signal. A signal that my mind was tired. A signal that I hadn't given myself space to process things when I was awake. A signal that the silence wasn't the problem. I lay back down and let my eyes close again. The thoughts were still there, but I didn't chase them as hard. I didn't try to solve them. I let them pass, one by one, like cars moving through a distant street. Some stayed longer, some faded quickly. I was still restless, still awake, but I understood something important for the first time that night. The night wasn't against me. My mind wasn't broken. It was simply busy in a world that rarely allows rest. And this night, quiet and unassuming, had brought me face to face with it. I didn't fall asleep right away, but I stopped fighting the silence. And in that small shift, the unease softened just enough for me to breathe again. Chapter 2. Thoughts that never asked permission. The thoughts didn't arrive gently. They didn't knock. They didn't wait to be invited. They simply appeared, already mid-sentence, already certain they deserved my attention. One moment I was lying still, trying to rest. The next, my mind was back somewhere else entirely. A conversation from months ago replayed itself without warning. Not the important part, the ending. The exact tone of my voice, the pause before I answered, the expression on the other person's face that I might have imagined or misread. Why did I say that? Why didn't I explain myself better? The question looped quietly, then tightened. Before I could stop it, another memory took its place, an old mistake, a decision I made when I didn't know any better, something that hadn't mattered at the time, but now felt significant, heavy, unresolved. My mind didn't care about context. It didn't care that I had grown since then. It only cared that the memory existed. I noticed how automatic it was. I wasn't choosing these thoughts. I wasn't searching for them. They rose on their own, fully formed, demanding review like unfinished work that refused to stay in the past. Each thought came with analysis attached. What did that say about me? What if people still remember? What if that moment defines more than I think? The room stayed dark and quiet, but inside my head, the lights were all on. I tried to shift my attention somewhere else. I focused on the sound of the air moving through the room, the feeling of the blanket against my arms, the steady rhythm of my breathing. It helped for a few seconds. Then the thoughts returned, as if they had only stepped away out of politeness. They didn't ask if now was a good time. They didn't check if I was tired. They continued. My mind moved through old choices like it was flipping through a file cabinet, pulling out folders I hadn't opened in years. Some were small, some were painful. All of them felt urgent in the middle of the night. I noticed a familiar shift inside me. Self-reflection turned into self-criticism. Curiosity turned into judgment. What started as remembering became rewriting, my mind editing the past, imagining better responses, smarter decisions, braver versions of myself. Versions that existed only now, too late to matter. The exhaustion crept in slowly. Not physical tiredness, but a deeper kind. The kind that comes from carrying your own mind without rest. I felt like I was watching myself think without being able to stop it. That loss of control was unsettling. I had always believed I was a thoughtful person, careful, aware, someone who considered consequences. That story had comforted me. But lying there, replaying the same thoughts for the third or fourth time, I wondered if I had confused thoughtfulness with overthinking. Thinking moved forward. Overthinking went in circles. And tonight, my mind was running laps. The thoughts didn't improve with repetition. They didn't become clearer or more useful. They just grew heavier, pressing into me with each pass. I realized how often my mind treated memory like evidence. One awkward moment became proof of incompetence. One unclear choice became proof of poor judgment. One misunderstanding became proof of failure. I wasn't remembering events. I was putting myself on trial.
The worst part was how convincing it felt in the dark. At night, every thought sounded more reasonable. Every worry felt more accurate. Without daylight, without other voices, my mind became the only narrator, and it was not a kind one. I noticed how my inner voice changed tone. It wasn't curious anymore. It was sharp, critical, certain. Why are you like this? You should have known better. You always do this. The word always appeared often, even when it wasn't true. Overthinking didn't care about fairness. It cared about control. If I could analyze enough, review enough, replay enough, maybe I could prevent future mistakes. Maybe I could protect myself from uncertainty. That belief had kept my mind busy for years, but tonight it felt like punishment instead of protection. I turned onto my side again, pressing my pillow closer, as if physical pressure might quiet mental noise. My jaw ached slightly from being clenched. I hadn't noticed when that happened. Mental exhaustion showed up quietly. It wasn't dramatic. It didn't make me cry or panic. It just made everything feel heavy and endless. I felt tired of my own thoughts, not because they were complex, but because they were repetitive. I thought about how often this happened, not just at night, but in small moments during the day. Waiting in line, sitting in traffic, standing in the shower. My mind never truly rested. It reviewed, it corrected, it warned. I had grown used to it, too used to it. That realization landed slowly. Overthinking wasn't something that happened occasionally. It was something that happened automatically, a reflex. I didn't ask my mind to analyze old conversations. It did it on its own. I didn't choose to relive past choices. They surfaced without consent. Thoughts that never asked permission. That was what made them exhausting. If I could turn them off, even briefly, maybe rest would come. But the harder I tried to stop them, the more they resisted. I wondered how long I had been living like this, how many nights I had spent replaying instead of resting, how many days I had entered already tired. how often my mental energy was spent on things I couldn't change. The exhaustion felt familiar, like something I had been carrying quietly for a long time. I wasn't weak for feeling it, I was worn down. That distinction mattered. Overthinking didn't mean I cared too much. It meant I hadn't learned how to let go. The thoughts weren't wrong for existing, they were just unchecked. I noticed a small shift when I stopped arguing with them. Instead of asking why they were there, I asked how they made me feel. Tired, heavy, unsettled. Naming that didn't make the thoughts disappear, but it changed my relationship with them. They stopped feeling like urgent instructions and started feeling like background noise. Still present, still annoying, but less commanding. I lay still and let the thoughts come and go without engaging them fully. I didn't chase conclusions. I didn't correct the past. I didn't imagine better outcomes. I just noticed the pattern, the repetition, the judgment, the exhaustion. For the first time, I saw overthinking not as intelligence, but as a habit formed from fear, from responsibility, from wanting to get things right, a habit that had outlived its usefulness. That understanding didn't fix the night. I was still awake, but it softened something inside me. I wasn't broken for thinking this way. I wasn't failing at rest. I was experiencing a mind that had never been taught how to stop. And maybe, just maybe, recognizing that was the first step towards something quieter. The thoughts continued, but they no longer felt like enemies I had to defeat. They felt like signals. Signals that my mind was tired. Signals that my inner world needed attention during the day, not interrogation at night. I didn't sleep right away, but the exhaustion shifted from overwhelming to understandable. And that was enough for now. I stayed still, breathing slowly, letting the thoughts pass without permission and without letting them take control.
Chapter 3. When silence became too loud. The room was completely quiet. Not the peaceful kind of quiet people talk about when they describe rest, but a deeper one. A stillness with no edges, no interruptions, no excuses. There was no noise outside the window, no voices through the walls, no distant hum to lean on. Even the small sounds I usually didn't notice seemed to disappear. And that was when everything inside me grew louder. Without sound to soften it, my thoughts filled the space immediately. They didn't rush in all at once. They expanded, slowly and confidently, as if they had been waiting for silence to claim the room. I noticed how exposed I felt. There was nowhere for my attention to go except inward. No distraction to reach for, no external rhythm to follow. Just my mind, fully awake, fully present. I shifted in bed, uncomfortable. The silence wasn't doing anything wrong, but it felt unbearable. That surprised me. I had always believed noise was optional. Music, podcasts, background TV, things I used for comfort, not necessity. I told myself I liked having sound around, that it helped me relax. But lying there in complete silence, I realized something uncomfortable. I didn't just prefer noise, I depended on it. The moment sound disappeared, my thoughts demanded center stage. They didn't whisper, they didn't suggest. They spoke clearly and repeatedly, each one echoing longer than the last. I tried to focus on my breathing again. Inhale, exhale. It worked for a few seconds. Then my mind filled the space between breaths with meaning, memory, and speculation. Why do you think this way? What does this say about you? Why can't you just be quiet? The silence made every question feel important. I understood then why I avoided moments like this, why I turned something on the second I got home, why I filled empty time with scrolling, listening, watching. It wasn't boredom I was avoiding. It was this, the soundless space where my thoughts could finally be heard without competition. I remembered how often I fell asleep with something playing quietly in the background, how rarely I allowed myself to sit in a room without feeling it, how uneasy I felt when the battery died or the internet cut out. I had told myself it was habit. Now I saw it was fear, not fear of silence itself, but fear of what silence revealed. When there was no noise, my mind had nowhere to hide. I noticed how much effort I put into staying slightly distracted, not enough to be overwhelmed, just enough to keep my thoughts from getting too clear. Noise blurred things. Silence sharpened them. And tonight, the sharpness felt overwhelming. I realized how long I had been running from quiet moments, filling them before they could deepen, interrupting them before they could speak. I had built a life where silence was rare. That wasn't an accident. The silence didn't cause my overthinking, it exposed it. That realization landed slowly but firmly. My thoughts weren't louder because the room was quiet. They were always this loud. I just never gave them space before. The silence acted like a mirror. It didn't create anything new. It reflected what was already there. And what was there was a mind that didn't know how to rest. I felt a wave of discomfort move through my body. My chest tightened slightly. My jaw clenched again. I hadn't noticed when I started holding tension there. I rolled onto my back and stared up at the ceiling, letting the darkness press in. The silence didn't judge me. It didn't demand answers. It simply stayed. That made it harder to escape. I noticed how my thoughts changed tone without noise. They became more personal, less abstract. They moved from analyzing events to questioning identity. Why are you like this? What if this never stops? What if this is just who you are? Those questions scared me more than the memories. I wasn't afraid of thinking. I was afraid of listening. Listening meant staying long enough to hear what my mind was actually saying beneath the repetition. It wasn't asking for solutions. It was asking for attention. That idea made me uncomfortable. I had spent years believing attention to my thoughts would make them worse, that if I listened too closely, they would spiral out of control. So I stayed busy, I stayed stimulated, I stayed slightly distracted at all times. But lying there, surrounded by silence, I realized the flaw in that logic. Avoiding my thoughts hadn't quieted them, it had only delayed them. Silence didn't create overthinking. It revealed the overthinking I had been carrying all day. The crack formed quietly. I wasn't losing control because it was silent. I was noticing the lack of control that already existed. That realization didn't calm me immediately, but it changed how I felt about the silence. The silence wasn't attacking me, it was exposing something I hadn't wanted to see. I lay there longer than I wanted to, letting the quiet stretch out. My thoughts continued, but I stopped chasing them. I didn't follow every question to its end. I let them pass without resolution. It was uncomfortable, but it was honest. I noticed that when I didn't respond to every thought, some of them lost strength. They still appeared, but they didn't demand the same urgency. The silence didn't get quieter. I got less reactive. That felt important. I realized how much of my fear came from the belief that silence was dangerous, that if I didn't feel it, something bad would happen. But nothing bad was happening. I was uncomfortable. I was tired. I was aware. That was all. The silence stayed, steady and neutral, as if it had always been there, waiting for me to notice. I understood something then that I hadn't before. Overthinking wasn't a night problem, it was a relationship problem, a relationship with my own mind. I had never learned how to sit with it without either feeding it or fighting it. Silence forced that relationship into the open. It showed me how much I avoided listening and how much listening scared me. Not because my thoughts were dangerous, but because they were unfinished, unheard, unacknowledged. That understanding didn't fix anything yet, but it shifted the conflict. The enemy wasn't silence, it was avoidance. And for the first time, I could see where the real struggle was. Not between me and my thoughts, but between me and my willingness to hear them. The silence grew no louder, but I felt the first real crack inside me. A small one, enough to let awareness in. Enough to know that overthinking wasn't random and it wasn't uncontrollable. It was something I had been running from. And now, in the quiet, I had stopped running. I didn't know what came next, but I knew this much. The silence wasn't the problem. It was the place where the truth finally had room to speak. Chapter 4. Trying to solve everything at 2 a.m. At some point during the night, I convinced myself that thinking harder was the solution. The clock on my phone glowed faintly on the bedside table. 2:03 a.m. I stared at the ceiling and told myself this was productive, that if I could just stay awake a little longer, think a little deeper, I could finally sort everything out. That was the lie overthinking always told me. I shifted onto my side and pulled the blanket tighter around my shoulders, as if physical comfort might help my mind focus. My body was exhausted, my eyes burned. My thoughts, however, felt sharp and urgent. This felt like my only chance. During the day, there was no time to think properly. Work, conversations, movement, noise, everything interrupted me before I could reach a conclusion. Night felt different, quiet, uninterrupted. This was when I could finally fix things. So I tried. I picked one thought and held onto it tightly. I replayed a conversation from earlier in the week, dissecting every word. Why did I say that? What did they mean by that look? Should I have responded differently? I imagined alternative versions of the same moment. Better responses, smarter timing, calmer reactions. I replayed them again and again, hoping one version would feel right. None of them did. Instead of moving on, my mind jumped forward. If that conversation went badly, what would happen next? Would it affect my work, my relationships, my future? The scenarios multiplied quickly. I imagined worst-case outcomes, then tried to prevent them by thinking further ahead. I planned responses to situations that hadn't happened yet. I prepared for reactions no one had expressed. It felt responsible. It felt like control. It felt necessary. If I didn't think about these things now, when would I? If I didn't anticipate problems, wasn't that careless? That was the tension that kept me awake. I believed that worrying meant I cared, that planning meant I was being mature, that staying alert meant I was protecting myself. But as the minutes passed, my body grew heavier, while my thoughts grew louder. I felt pressure building behind my eyes. My jaw tightened. My chest felt tight, like I was holding something in place with sheer effort. I noticed how many times I told myself, just one more thought. Just solve this part, then you can rest. Rest never came. Each attempt to reach clarity opened another door, another detail, another possibility, another responsibility. What if I made the wrong choice? What if I already did? What if this all comes back to me later? The questions didn't want answers. They wanted attention. I realized how much responsibility I was carrying in my head. Responsibility for outcomes, for other people's reactions, for mistakes I hadn't made yet. I believed that if I thought enough, I could prevent pain, that awareness could replace action, that exhaustion was the price of safety. But lying there at 2 a.m., my mind spinning without progress, something felt wrong. I wasn't solving anything. I was circling. I tried to organize my thoughts more deliberately. I mentally made lists, things to fix, things to improve, things to remember for tomorrow. The list never ended. Every solution led to another problem. Every plan created a new risk. The more I tried to control the future, the less control I felt. My thoughts began to overlap, repeating themselves with slight variations. The same worries dressed differently, the same fears approaching from new angles. I noticed how familiar this pattern was. Night after night, I did this. I told myself I was being productive, but I woke up exhausted with nothing resolved. The truth was uncomfortable. I wasn't thinking to solve, I was thinking to soothe. Overthinking gave me the illusion of action. As long as my mind was busy, I felt like I was doing something, like I wasn't ignoring problems. But thinking wasn't fixing anything. It was just keeping me awake. I rolled onto my back and stared at the dark ceiling again. The room felt heavier now. The silence pressed differently, no longer neutral. It felt crowded by thoughts that refused to settle. I checked the clock again. 2:41 a.m. Time had passed without progress. I felt frustration rise, directed mostly at myself. Why couldn't I stop? Why couldn't I just let things go like other people seemed to? I told myself to relax, to stop thinking. That made it worse. The command backfired immediately. My thoughts reacted to pressure by becoming louder, faster, more insistent. I noticed something important in that moment. My mind wasn't calm because it was trying to help. It was restless because it didn't trust me to let go. Somewhere along the way, I had learned that rest was risky, that if I stopped paying attention, something bad would happen, that control lived in constant awareness. So even when my body begged for sleep, my mind stayed alert, scanning for threats that didn't exist in the dark bedroom. I realized how unfair that was to myself. I was asking my mind to solve everything at a time when it was least capable of doing so. I was demanding clarity from a system running on exhaustion. No wonder nothing made sense. The future I was trying to plan didn't exist yet. The past I was trying to fix couldn't be changed. The present moment was slipping by unnoticed, while I was stuck in imagined timelines. I thought about how often I believed night thinking was deeper thinking, that exhaustion brought truth. But looking at the mess of half-formed conclusions in my head, I saw the reality. Night didn't make my thoughts wiser. It made them louder and less accurate. I had been trusting a tired mind with decisions it wasn't meant to make. That realization didn't stop the thoughts immediately, but it changed how I related to them. Instead of following each one, I began to notice the pattern itself, the urgency, the repetition, the false promise of resolution. I saw how overthinking at night was less about logic and more about fear. Fear of uncertainty, fear of mistakes, fear of not being prepared. I wasn't trying to solve everything. I was trying to feel safe. That softened something inside me. I stopped pushing for answers and started paying attention to how tired I was. My eyelids felt heavy. My body ached slightly. I had ignored these signals for hours. I placed one hand on my chest and felt my breathing shallow but steady. I didn't try to control it. I just noticed it. The thoughts were still there, but I stopped engaging them. I let them pass like noise from another room, present but not central. This was harder than thinking. Thinking gave me something to do. Letting go asked me to trust. Trust that not everything needed to be solved right now. Trust that rest wasn't failure. Trust that morning would bring a clearer perspective than 2 a.m. ever could. I understood then why overthinking felt so powerful at night. It made me feel responsible, but responsibility without rest wasn't strength. It was self-neglect. The urge to think surged again, trying to pull me back into analysis. I noticed it without judging it. Of course, my mind wanted to continue. This was familiar territory, but familiarity didn't mean effectiveness. I turned onto my side and faced the wall, closing my eyes gently instead of forcing them shut. I didn't demand sleep. I allowed rest. The problems I was trying to solve didn't disappear, but they stopped demanding immediate attention. And for the first time that night, I felt the tiniest sense of relief. Not because anything was fixed, but because I stopped trying to fix everything in the dark. I didn't know what the answers were, but I knew this much. Trying to solve my entire life at 2 a.m. had never helped me before, and maybe tonight didn't need solutions. Maybe it needed rest. That thought didn't end the overthinking completely, but it loosened its grip. And in that small release, I felt the possibility of sleep return, not as escape, but as permission.
Chapter 5. The moment I realized I was tired of my own mind. Sometime before morning, the thoughts stopped feeling sharp. They became heavy. Not quieter, just heavier, slower, like furniture being dragged across the floor of my mind. Each thought took effort to lift, to examine, to set down again. My body had been tired for hours. Now my mind finally caught up. I lay there staring into the dark, eyes open, unfocused. The room hadn't changed. The silence hadn't changed. But something inside me had reached its limit. I didn't want to think anymore. Not because the problems were solved, not because answers appeared, but because I felt done. Done analyzing, done replaying, done trying to outsmart uncertainty with repetition. It surprised me how emotional that realization felt. For so long, thinking had been my default, my coping mechanism, my shield. If I stayed mentally active, I felt prepared. If I kept reviewing possibilities, I felt responsible. Now that same habit felt unbearable. Each new thought landed with a dull weight instead of urgency. Even the familiar worries felt tired of themselves. They repeated, but without conviction, like actors reciting lines long after the audience had left. I noticed my jaw aching from being clenched. My temples throbbed softly. My chest felt tight, not with fear, but with fatigue. This wasn't anxiety anymore. It was exhaustion. I had crossed a quiet threshold. I wasn't scared of my thoughts. I wasn't trying to fix them. I was simply tired of carrying them. I rolled onto my side and curled slightly inward, instinctively protective. My mind tried to continue its routine. One more scenario, one more memory, one more adjustment. But something in me resisted. Not forcefully, gently, like setting down a heavy bag after pretending it wasn't heavy for too long. I felt a wave of emotion rise suddenly, unexpected and soft. Not panic, not sadness with a story attached, just relief. Relief that I didn't have to think anymore. Relief that I could stop trying to manage everything mentally. Relief that I didn't have to be alert all the time. My eyes burned slightly, not enough to cry, but enough to feel how close I was to letting go. I realized how long I had been pushing my mind beyond its limits, how many nights I had asked it to work overtime, how often I demanded clarity when what I needed was rest. I thought about how I judged myself for not being able to stop thinking, how I labeled it as weakness, lack of discipline, overreaction. But lying there, completely drained, another truth became clear. I wasn't broken. I was exhausted from thinking too much. The sentence arrived without effort, and when it did, it felt honest in a way nothing else had that night. I wasn't failing at calming down. I was worn out. That distinction mattered. Broken implies something needs fixing. Exhausted implies something needs care. For the first time, I stopped arguing with my mind. I stopped telling it to be quiet.
I stopped demanding solutions. I acknowledged what it had been doing all along, trying to protect me. Even now, even in its most relentless moments, my mind wasn't attacking me. It was overworking, scanning, preparing, anticipating. It didn't know when to stop because I never told it it was safe to. That realization softened me completely. I felt a tenderness toward myself that I hadn't expected, a compassion that wasn't dramatic or emotional, just steady and real. Of course I was tired. Anyone would be carrying this much mental weight without rest. I placed one hand on my forehead, then let it fall back onto the pillow. My breathing deepened slightly on its own. Not calm yet, but slower. The thoughts were still there, hovering, but they no longer demanded my participation. I didn't follow them. I didn't push them away either. I let them exist without answering. That was new. I noticed how different it felt to stop engaging without stopping awareness. I wasn't asleep. I wasn't distracted. I was simply present without effort. The room felt softer somehow, the dark less crowded. My body sank deeper into the mattress as if it had been waiting for permission. I understood then that the real cost of overthinking wasn't the thoughts themselves, it was the constant pressure to respond to them. I had treated every thought like a task, every worry like an assignment, every memory like a problem to solve. No wonder I was exhausted. My mind hadn't been resting, it had been working, non-stop, even when my body lay still. The realization didn't come with guilt. It came with kindness. I didn't tell myself I should have known better. I didn't replay the night to find mistakes. I didn't judge the hours already lost to thinking. I let them go. For once, I allowed myself to be tired without trying to overcome it. I allowed the fatigue to be what it was, a signal, not of weakness, of limits. I whispered the truth quietly, not for anyone else to hear. I'm tired. The words felt grounding, simple, real. They didn't ask for solutions. They didn't demand change. They acknowledged reality. Something loosened in my chest when I said them. My shoulders dropped. My breathing deepened another notch. I didn't feel peaceful yet, but I felt allowed to rest. That was enough. The thoughts drifted now instead of collided. They lost their sharp edges. They became background noise rather than commands. I noticed how my eyelids grew heavier without force, how my body stopped bracing itself, how my mind, finally unburdened, began to slow on its own. I didn't fall asleep immediately, but I stopped fighting wakefulness. I stopped treating rest like something to earn after thinking hard enough. I understood then that overthinking had never been about intelligence or diligence. It had been about fear of letting go, and exhaustion was what happened when fear ran out of energy. I stayed there in that fragile, quiet moment between wakefulness and sleep, not doing anything, not fixing anything, just existing. For the first time that night, my mind wasn't racing. It was resting. Not because the world was safe, but because I finally stopped asking it to protect me alone. The problems I carried were still there. Tomorrow still came. But in that moment, I didn't need answers. I needed rest. And I let myself have it. That was the soft collapse. Not a breakdown, not surrender, just the moment I stopped pushing my mind past what it could hold. And in that stopping, I felt something I hadn't felt all night. Relief. Quiet. Enough.
Chapter 6. Understanding what overthinking really is. When morning finally came, it didn't arrive with clarity. It arrived quietly, the way mornings usually do, light pressing gently through the curtains, the room still holding the shape of the night. My body felt heavy but rested in a way it hadn't for hours. My mind was slower, less urgent, not silent, just calmer. I lay there for a moment, noticing the difference. The thoughts were still present, but they didn't rush forward all at once. They waited. That was new. As I sat up and let my feet touch the floor, something settled into place inside me. Not a solution, not relief in the dramatic sense. Understanding. For so long, I had believed overthinking meant something about who I was, that it said I was anxious, weak, undisciplined, or incapable of letting go. I treated it like a flaw I needed to correct. But after the night I just lived through, that story no longer fit. Overthinking wasn't intelligence. It wasn't depth. It wasn't even awareness. It was fear, combined with responsibility, running without rest. I saw it clearly now. My mind hadn't been trying to hurt me. It had been trying to help. I replayed the pattern in my head, this time without judgment. The late nights, the constant analysis, the endless planning, the need to anticipate everything before it happened. I thought that made me careful. In reality, it made me exhausted. Overthinking was what happened when my mind didn't trust that rest was safe, when it believed vigilance was the only way to prevent regret, failure, or pain. It wasn't trying to be smart, it was trying to protect me. That realization changed everything. I felt my shoulders relax slightly as I made coffee and stood by the window, watching the quiet morning outside. Cars passed slowly. A few people walked by, beginning their day. The world hadn't demanded answers overnight. Nothing had fallen apart because I stopped thinking. I noticed how my mind still wanted to jump ahead. It offered reminders, worries, small nudges of concern. But now I saw those thoughts differently. They weren't commands. They were signals. Signals that I had been carrying too much responsibility alone, that I believed it was my job to foresee every outcome, manage every reaction, prevent every mistake. That belief had been exhausting me. I realized how often I confused responsibility with control, how easily I believed that if I didn't think everything through, I was being careless. But responsibility doesn't require constant mental activity, and control is not the same as care. Overthinking had blurred that line for me. It made me believe that thinking endlessly was the same as preparing wisely, that staying mentally alert at all times was a form of maturity. But maturity also knows when to stop. It knows when effort turns into harm. It knows that some things cannot be solved by thinking harder. I had spent years trying to repair my life entirely in my head. I believed that if I just reached the right conclusion, the right plan, the right understanding, everything would settle. What I didn't realize was that my mind wasn't designed for that kind of constant load. It needed rest to function properly, and I hadn't given it any. I sat at the table with my coffee warming my hands and felt a sense of calm clarity that wasn't forced. Not optimism, not motivation, just perspective. Overthinking wasn't a personal failure. It was a coping strategy that had outlived its usefulness. At some point, my mind learned that constant analysis was necessary. Maybe it had worked once. Maybe it helped me get through something difficult. But now it was keeping me stuck. Understanding that didn't make me angry at myself. It made me patient. I thought about how many times I had told myself to just stop thinking, how often I treated overthinking like an enemy to fight. No wonder it resisted. I had been fighting the very thing trying to protect me. Protection doesn't disappear when you attack it. It tightens. Now, instead of fighting, I listened. I noticed how overthinking showed up most when I was tired, overwhelmed, or trying to meet too many expectations at once, when rest felt undeserved, when uncertainty felt unacceptable. Overthinking filled the space where rest should have been. It stepped in when I didn't. That wasn't a flaw. That was adaptation.
I realized then that I didn't need to fix everything. I didn't need to solve my entire life. I didn't need to carry every possible future in my head. What I needed was permission to pause, permission to trust that not every thought deserved attention, permission to rest without guilt. That didn't mean abandoning responsibility. It meant sharing it with time, with reality, with the understanding that some answers arrive only after rest. I felt a gentle sense of responsibility shift inside me, not the heavy kind that demands perfection, the quieter kind that asks for care. Care for my limits, care for my attention, care for the part of me that had been working non-stop without recognition. Overthinking wasn't something I needed to eliminate. It was something I needed to understand. When I understood it, it lost its power to control me. I still thought deeply, I still reflected, but I no longer believed every thought was urgent. I no longer treated exhaustion like a problem to push through. I recognized the signs sooner now. The mental tightness, the looping thoughts, the sense of urgency that appeared without cause. Instead of following them, I asked a different question. Am I rested enough to think clearly? Often the answer was no, and that answer mattered more than any conclusion my tired mind could reach. The day moved forward gently. I went through my routine with more awareness than usual. I noticed when my mind tried to speed up, and I let it slow again. Not perfectly, but intentionally. Overthinking didn't disappear, but it became softer. It became less convincing. I understood now that clarity doesn't come from forcing answers. It comes from creating the conditions where answers can emerge. Rest was one of those conditions. So was kindness. So was letting go of the belief that I had to manage everything mentally. I felt something new settle into place as the morning unfolded. Trust. Not blind trust, but trust in my ability to respond when needed rather than anticipate everything in advance. Trust that my mind could rest and still function. Trust that I didn't need to repair myself. I needed to take care of myself. Overthinking was never the enemy. It was a signal, a tired one. And now that I could hear it clearly, I didn't need to silence it. I needed to support it. That understanding didn't feel like a breakthrough. It felt like relief, calm, and finally, clarity. Chapter 7. Letting the thoughts pass without following them. I didn't wake up one day with an empty mind. That was the first thing I had to accept. The thoughts were still there. They showed up in the quiet moments, during pauses, when I least expected them. They arrived the way they always had. Uninvited, familiar, convincing. The difference was subtle. I no longer chased them. At first, this wasn't intentional. It happened by accident, in small moments when I was too tired to engage. A thought would appear, and instead of grabbing it and pulling it closer, I would notice it and keep going. That surprised me. The thought didn't disappear, but it didn't take over either. I began to realize that thinking and following a thought were two different actions. One happened automatically, the other was a choice I didn't know I was making. For years, I had treated every thought like a message that required a response, a question that needed an answer, a warning that demanded action. Now, I experimented with something new. I let the thought exist without responding to it. It felt uncomfortable at first, like ignoring someone who was speaking directly to me. My mind resisted. It tried to pull my attention back, repeating the same idea with more urgency. What if you forget this? What if this matters? What if you're being careless? I noticed the tension rise in my body when that happened, the familiar tightening in my chest, the urge to analyze, to resolve, to control. Instead of following the thought, I did something simpler. I breathed. Not in a dramatic way, not counting breaths or forcing calm. I just noticed the air moving in and out of my body, the sensation of my feet on the floor, the weight of my hands resting where they were. The thought stayed, but it lost its grip. I realized then that calm didn't come from control. It came from allowance. Allowance to let thoughts exist without treating them as instructions. Allowance to let my mind do what minds do without turning it into a task. This wasn't silence, it was space. I practiced this throughout the day, in line at the store, sitting at my desk, walking down the street. A thought would appear, something unfinished, something uncomfortable, something familiar, and instead of stepping into it, I stayed where I was. I noticed the environment around me, the sounds, the light, the simple fact that I was here, now. The thought passed. Not immediately, but eventually. Some thoughts lingered longer than others. Some returned again and again, especially the ones tied to fear or responsibility. I didn't fight those either. I let them come back. Each time I noticed them a little more quickly, and each time I chose not to follow. This wasn't about discipline, it was about gentleness. I wasn't trying to train my mind, I was learning to trust myself not to be pulled into every mental current. Overthinking didn't disappear, but it stopped running my life. I noticed how different my body felt when I didn't engage. My shoulders stayed lower, my breathing stayed deeper, my energy didn't drain as quickly. There was a quiet strength in that, not the strength of control, the strength of restraint. I realized how often I had believed that calm required effort, that peace had to be achieved by force, that the only way to stop thinking was to think my way out. Now I saw the irony. Thinking harder had never brought calm. Letting go did. Letting go didn't mean ignoring problems or avoiding responsibility. It meant choosing when to engage and when to rest. I still set aside time to reflect, to plan, to think deliberately when my mind was rested and my body was supported. But I stopped doing it at random hours, fueled by fear and fatigue. I stopped treating every thought like an emergency. That change was quiet. No one noticed it from the outside, but inside, everything felt lighter. I caught myself smiling softly at times, not because something exciting happened, but because I noticed how peaceful it felt to let a thought drift by without grabbing it. There was freedom in that. I didn't need to resolve everything in my head. I didn't need to predict every outcome all the time. I could let thoughts pass like clouds, not because they were meaningless, but because not all of them required my attention. Some were just weather. This didn't mean I never overthought again. Some nights my mind still grew busy. Some moments the old habits returned. Stress made thoughts louder. Fatigue made them stickier. When that happened, I didn't judge myself. I recognized it. I noticed how quickly self-judgment tried to turn a moment of overthinking into a story about failure. I didn't follow that either. I returned to the same practice. Notice, breathe, allow, release. Sometimes it worked quickly. Sometimes it didn't. Either way, I stayed. That was the real change. I stayed with myself instead of fighting myself. I stopped demanding a perfectly calm mind. I accepted a human one. There was empowerment in that acceptance, not loud empowerment, not confidence that announces itself. Quiet empowerment. The kind that comes from knowing you don't have to control everything to be okay. The kind that comes from trusting your capacity to respond when needed instead of anticipating every possibility. I noticed how this approach changed my relationship with silence. Silence no longer felt like a trap where thoughts attacked me. It felt like a space where thoughts could move freely without owning me. I didn't need to fill it. I didn't need to fear it. I could sit in it. That realization settled into my daily life slowly. Conversations felt less rushed. Decisions felt clearer. Even when uncertainty remained, it didn't overwhelm me. I was no longer arguing with my mind. I was listening without obeying. That distinction mattered. I understood now that healing from overthinking wasn't about erasing thoughts. It was about changing my relationship with them. I didn't need to win against my mind. I needed to walk beside it without letting it pull me off course. That was enough. As the days passed, I noticed how often calm arrived unexpectedly, not when I tried to force it, but when I stopped chasing it. Calm came in the moments between thoughts, in the pauses, in the allowance. And when it did, it felt natural, earned, not forced. I no longer expected my mind to be quiet all the time. I expected myself to be present. That expectation was kinder, more realistic, more sustainable. I still thought, but I no longer followed every thought into exhaustion. And in that space between thought and reaction, I found something steady, not silence, clarity, not control, freedom. That was the quiet empowerment I had been searching for all along, and it didn't require stopping my mind. It required letting it be.
Chapter 8. The night my mind finally rested. That night looked almost the same as the others. The room was quiet, the lights were low, the world outside had slowed into distant sounds that barely reached the window. Nothing dramatic marked the moment, no special routine, no breakthrough event. And yet, everything felt different. I lay in bed with the familiar awareness that thoughts would come. I didn't expect silence. I didn't expect an empty mind. I had learned by now that those expectations only created pressure. The thoughts did arrive. They always did. Small reminders, half-formed worries, memories that surfaced without asking, ideas about tomorrow, questions without answers. But this time, they didn't take control. They moved through my mind the way background noise moves through a room, present, but not demanding attention. I noticed them without stepping into them. I let them pass without deciding what they meant. The night was still quiet, but it wasn't tense. I rested my head deeper into the pillow and felt the weight of my body settle naturally. My breathing found its rhythm without effort, slow, even, unforced. For the first time in a long while, I didn't brace myself for the night. I didn't prepare for a mental battle. I didn't tell myself to stop thinking or try to distract my way into sleep. I allowed the night to be what it was. The thoughts rose and fell like gentle waves. Some lingered for a moment, some faded quickly. None of them pulled me under. I noticed how different that felt. Usually, nights were something to survive, hours to endure while my mind raced ahead of me. Tonight felt like something I could move through gently. Not because my life was suddenly resolved, not because my problems had disappeared, but because I stopped fighting the presence of my own thoughts. I realized how much energy I had spent trying to control my mind, how often I treated rest as a reward instead of a need, how deeply I believed that vigilance was necessary, even in the dark. Letting go didn't feel like giving up. It felt like trusting that not every thought needed my response, trusting that morning could hold what night could not, trusting that rest was not avoidance, but care. The room felt softer as time passed. The silence no longer felt loud. It felt spacious. I noticed the small details I usually missed, the gentle hum of the building, the faint rhythm of my breath, the way the darkness wrapped around the edges of the room without pressure. I wasn't watching the clock. I wasn't measuring progress. I wasn't waiting for sleep to arrive. I was resting, even before sleep. That realization mattered. Sleep wasn't the goal. Peace was. And peace didn't require the absence of thought. It required the absence of resistance. I felt my eyelids grow heavy, not because I forced them closed, but because my body recognized safety, the kind of safety that comes when nothing is being demanded of you.
The thoughts continued quietly in the background, but they felt distant now, like voices in another room. I didn't answer them. I didn't argue with them. I didn't follow them. I let them be. There was a moment, brief but clear, when I noticed how calm my chest felt, how my jaw was unclenched, how my shoulders were no longer raised in anticipation. My body had been waiting for this, not solutions. Permission. Permission to stop holding everything together. Permission to rest without justification. Permission to exist without effort. I thought about how many nights I had spent believing rest came only after resolution, that I needed to earn sleep by thinking through every possible outcome. Now I understood how backwards that belief was. Clarity doesn't come before rest. It comes after. I didn't make any promises to myself that night. I didn't decide that overthinking would never return. I didn't imagine a future where my mind would always be calm. I knew better. This wasn't about perfection. It was about relationship. A new relationship with my thoughts. One built on awareness instead of fear, on allowance instead of control. The thoughts would come again, stress would return, some nights would still be difficult. But now I knew something I hadn't before. I didn't have to fight my mind to find rest. I could let it move without following it. That knowledge felt steady and grounded, not exciting or dramatic. It felt sustainable. Sleep came quietly, not suddenly, not deeply at first. It arrived the way rest should, gently, naturally, without force. The last thing I remember before drifting off was the absence of urgency, the absence of pressure to solve, fix, or prepare. Just the feeling of being held by the night instead of challenged by it. The room stayed quiet, the thoughts stayed soft, and for the first time in a long while, my mind rested, not because everything was resolved, but because I stopped resisting what was. The night I stopped fighting my thoughts was the night my mind finally rested.